The transport ship burned through the atmosphere, tearing fire across the dark alien sky. Inside, a lone human sat strapped to a cracked chair, his chest rising with shallow breaths. He had no army, no backup, and no chance to turn back. His name was Daniel Kane, a soldier who had already buried his squad under the dirt of forgotten worlds. Now he was alone, falling toward a planet where no human had ever survived. The mission brief had called this world simple, a testing ground. But Kane already knew from the silence of his commanders that it was more than that. It was a hunt. The ship slammed into the ground with a shriek of tearing metal. Dust and smoke swallowed the wreck. Kane unbuckled, his ears ringing, and forced the hatch open. He stepped out into air that tasted of ash and iron. The ground stretched wide, covered in broken stone and sharp black grass that swayed like knives. In the distance, towers of bone jutted from the ground like the ribs of dead giants. The planet itself looked like a graveyard. Kane scanned the horizon. His rifle was gone, burned in the crash. All he had was a knife, a cracked survival kit, and the training drilled into him by years of war. He felt eyes watching him before he heard them. The first growl rose from the shadows, deep and heavy, like a drum of thunder. His heart pounded, but he didn't freeze. He crouched, eyes sharp, searching. Then he saw it. The creature was enormous, covered in dark scales that shimmered like oil. Its eyes glowed faint orange, teeth jagged and wet with hunger. It moved on 4 limbs, but its back arched like a predator ready to strike. Behind it, more shapes slid out of the mist, circling. He counted 3, then 5. They had been waiting. They had been promised prey, and he was the prey. Kane's breathing slowed. He had learned in war that panic was the first enemy. These beasts were hunters, but they had never hunted a human like him. He pulled the knife free, its edge dull, but his grip steady. The first creature lunged, claws tearing at the ground as it sprang. Kane rolled sideways, dirt spraying, and drove the blade upward into the creature's throat. Hot blood sprayed his face as the monster screamed. Crashing to the ground, the others howled, a sound that made the rocks tremble. They circled tighter, rage burning in their glowing eyes. Kane stood tall, covered in blood that wasn't his knife trembling in his hand, but not from fear. He met their eyes and bared his teeth like a predator himself. In that instant, he understood the truth of this place. They were not testing if he could survive. They were testing if he could dominate. Hours passed as the hunt stretched deeper into the alien night. Kane tracked the hunters as they tracked him, using broken stone for cover, moving with patience. He learned their cries, the sound of their steps, the way their bodies shifted before they leapt. He built traps from twisted metal and jagged bone he pulled from the ground. When one beast stumbled into his snare, spikes driving into its chest, he finished it with ruthless precision. Another fell to a pit he dug with bare hands, its scream echoing across the wasteland until silence took it. By the second day, the hunters were no longer circling. They were retreating. The air that once smelled of bloodlust now carried the sharpness of fear. Kane felt it. The planet itself seemed to shift around him. The predators that had claimed this land for centuries, beginning to treat him not as prey, but as something worse, something that turned their hunt against them. Standing on a ridge, knife in hand, blood drying on his skin, Kane stared out across the alien wasteland. His chest rose steady, his mind sharper than ever. He was no longer a soldier sent to survive. He was no longer a man who had lost his squad. He had become something else. Something older, something primal. And the world knew it. From the mist, hundreds of glowing eyes opened, circling him once more. But they did not rush forward. Not yet. They waited, tense and uncertain, as if weighing the cost of attacking the creature that now stood among them. The creature that looked human, but carried the presence of a predator, greater than all of them. Kane lowered his knife, blood dripping from its edge, and whispered into the dark, "Come and see." The night roared in answer. Asterisk. The second night on the alien world stretched longer than Kane thought possible. The mist thickened, curling around jagged stones, hiding shapes that whispered through the dark. He kept moving, step by step, listening with every nerve sharpened. His knife was still in his grip, but now he carried more than steel. He carried the weight of victories. The hunters had bled, and their world had watched. Kane's body ached from bruises and cuts, yet his mind stayed alert. He found the remains of the beast he had killed first, its blood dark against the ground. Strange insects crawled over the corpse, breaking it down with silent hunger. But it wasn't the insects that held his attention. It was the marks around the carcass. Large clawed footprints, many of them. The hunters had returned, circling their dead. Kane knelt, fingers brushing the prints. They hadn't dragged the body away. They had left it here. It wasn't respect. It was a message. Kane rose, shoulders tightening. They wanted him to know that killing one of them meant nothing. They were still many. And they wanted him to feel small again. But Kane had learned long ago that fear was not a weight he carried. He climbed a ridge and looked across the plain. Fires burned faintly in the distance, not from machines, but from cracks in the earth where heat spilled upward. The landscape itself seemed alive, groaning under the weight of unseen forces. And somewhere out there, beyond the smoke, he knew the hunters were waiting. That night they came again. Not one, not three, but a pack. 10 shadows moving in silence, their eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Kane heard the scrape of their claws on the stone before he saw them. He didn't run. He crouched low, one hand steady on the ground, waiting. The first charged, leaping high, claws stretched forward. Kane rolled sideways and drove his knife deep into its side. The beast screamed and fell thrashing. The others lunged at once, their bodies slamming into him like a storm. Kane swung wildly, the blade flashing, cutting into flesh. Claws raked his back, hot blood spilled from his arm, but he didn't stop. He fought like an animal cornered, faster than thought, every strike made to kill. When the dust cleared, 3 of the beasts lay still, their blood steaming in the cold air. Kane staggered back, chest heaving, his own blood dripping down his side. The remaining hunters circled, uncertain. Their snarls were not confident anymore. They were hesitant, cautious. Kane saw it in their eyes. He grinned, teeth sharp in the firelight of their glowing gaze. "You're learning," he muttered, voice low. "Good." The pack pulled back, retreating into the mist. Kane collapsed to one knee, gripping his knife tight. His wounds burned, but he forced himself to stay awake. He had survived again, but survival was no longer enough. He needed more than a blade. He needed weapons that could turn the hunter's strength against them. By dawn, Kane began to build. He tore bone from the dead creatures, shaping sharp spikes. He stripped their hides, twisting sinew into cords. With stone, metal scraps from his crashed ship, and sheer will, he crafted crude but deadly tools. Spears hardened by fire, blades longer than his arm, traps lined with jagged bone. His hands shook with pain, but his eyes burned with focus. The hunters came again at dusk. They always came. But this time, Kane was ready. The first fell into a pit lined with spikes, impaled as it thrashed and wailed. The second triggered a snare. Its body pulled high into the air before Kane's spear pierced its chest. Another charged straight into a barricade of sharpened bone, its skull cracking against the barrier. Each kill fed his strength, each victory echoing louder across the land. By the third day, Kane was no longer just a man with a knife. He had become something more, something the hunters could no longer read. He moved with their silence, struck with their speed, killed with their ruthlessness. Yet unlike them, he planned. He learned. The mist around him carried whispers, guttural sounds in the distance, as though the beasts themselves were confused. He had entered their world as prey, But prey did not turn the land into a killing ground. Prey did not make predators hesitate. Cain stood over another dead beast, its blood soaking into the black grass, and stared at the horizon. More would come. He could feel them. Dozens, maybe hundreds. They would not stop. But neither would he. For the first time, Cain felt no despair, no doubt. This planet was not his prison. It was his battlefield. And soon, it would be his kingdom. Asterisk. The third dawn on the alien world arrived in silence. Mist stretched across the plains, broken only by the black shapes of dead hunters Cain had left behind. Their bodies lay where they had fallen, a warning to the rest. Flies the size of a fist swarmed over the carcasses, but the other predators had kept their distance. Cain noticed the difference at once. The land no longer carried the constant echoes of claws scratching the stone. The air no longer trembled with their growls. He stood tall on a ridge, a spear in hand, his body aching but unbroken. He had fought them, killed them, and adapted faster than they expected. Now the hunters were watching from the shadows, studying him as much as he studied them. Cain's lips curled into a grim smile. They thought him prey, yet already they hesitated. The balance of power was shifting, but Cain knew this was not the end. He had fought wars on Earth, seen how enemies tested, pushed, and waited for weakness. This planet was no different. Somewhere out there, something greater waited to see if he would break. He had to be ready before it came. Cain spent the day gathering supplies from the wreck of his transport. The ship's hull was broken open like a tin can, but inside he found shards of metal, wiring, even a shattered energy cell. He hammered the metal into blades, lashed them to long poles of bone, and crafted new weapons stronger than before. His hands blistered and bled, but he welcomed the pain. Pain meant he was still alive. When the sun dipped low, the world changed again. The mist grew heavier, and a deep rumble shook the ground. Cain froze. This was not the sound of claws or snarls. It was the earth itself groaning. From the fog emerged shapes larger than anything he had faced before. Hunters had returned, but these were not the same beasts. These were giants. Twice the size of the predators he had already fought, their shoulders broad, their fangs jagged as swords. Their eyes glowed hotter, brighter, like embers burning in the dark. They were older, stronger, the true apex of their kind. Cain's heart hammered, but he didn't step back. He tightened his grip on his spear. If this was the next trial, he would meet it head-on. The first giant lunged. Cain sidestepped, slamming his spear forward with all his strength. The sharpened metal pierced its side, but the beast didn't fall. It roared, swinging a claw that nearly tore him in half. Cain rolled across the stone, gasping, blood on his arm. He rose again, teeth gritted. This fight was not like before. These monsters would not fall to simple traps. They were stronger, smarter, and far more dangerous. Cain shifted his tactics. He lured them toward narrow passes between jagged stones, forcing them to fight in spaces too tight for their size. He stabbed, slashed, and struck at weak spots: eyes, joints, throat. His body screamed with every movement, but his mind burned with focus. One by one, they fell. The first collapsed after Cain drove a blade deep into its eye. The second staggered into a stone wall, where he leapt onto its back and cut until it no longer moved. The third beast cornered him, its jaws snapping shut inches from his face. But Cain shoved a broken energy cell into its mouth and dove aside. The explosion tore the creature apart, spraying fire and smoke across the plain. Cain lay on the ground, chest heaving, blood running from new wounds. Around him, the bodies of giants steamed in the cold mist. His entire body trembled with exhaustion, but he forced himself to stand. He raised his blood-soaked weapon high, roaring into the alien night. The sound echoed across the land, a challenge thrown to every predator still hiding in the dark. For a long moment, silence answered him. Then, slowly, distant howls rose, not in rage but in something else. Fear. Cain's roar had claimed the land. And the hunters had heard it. That night he didn't rest. He walked among the corpses of the giants, studying their forms. Their hides were tougher than stone, their bones dense and heavy. He cut them apart, crafting armor from their scales, shields from their ribs, weapons from their claws. When he moved again, he was no longer just a man with a knife or a spear. He was a predator clad in the strength of those he had slain. The mist parted as Cain strode forward, armored in the bones of his enemies. His eyes were bloodshot, his face hardened, his body scarred but unyielding. The hunters watched from afar, but none dared step closer. In the language of the wild, Cain had spoken clearly. He was not prey. He was the rival they had never known could exist, and deep in the shadows, something else stirred. Not beasts, not hunters. Something older, something that had watched silently from the beginning. For the first time, Cain felt not hunted, but judged. He tightened his grip on his weapon. The game was changing. Cain woke on the fourth day with the cold sting of wind on his face. His body screamed from wounds that had barely clotted, but he forced himself to rise. The ground was littered with bones and steaming blood. The giants he had slain were proof of his will, yet Cain felt it in his gut. The trial was far from over. The mist that always hung heavy over the plains now seemed alive, shifting in strange patterns. Cain crouched, eyes narrowing. The beasts had always come at night or in packs, but this was different. The silence was too heavy. The land itself felt as if it held its breath. He marched on, spear in hand, armor made from bone creaking on his shoulders. His shadow stretched long across the broken stone. Hours passed before he saw it, carvings etched into the side of a cliff. They were not made by beasts. The lines were too precise, the symbols too deliberate. Cain traced one with his hand, feeling grooves cut deep into the rock. It was language. Someone had built this. Someone had been here before. As he studied the markings, a sharp click echoed behind him. Cain spun, spear ready, but froze at what he saw. It wasn't a beast. It was a figure, tall and alien, walking upright on two legs. Its body was lean, armored in natural plates of dark chitin, eyes glowing faint blue. In its hands it carried a weapon like a spear, but crafted with precision. This was no wild predator. This was a hunter of intelligence. The alien raised its weapon and let out a cry, a sharp call that echoed across the cliffs. From the shadows, more of them appeared. 5, then 10, each armed and armored, their movements too coordinated to be animals. Cain's heart pounded. These weren't the beasts he had fought before. These were the masters behind the hunt. They spread in a circle, weapons pointed at him. Cain stepped back, his grip tightening on his spear. His instincts screamed at him to fight, but he understood what this was. The planet hadn't just been a test of survival against beasts. It was an arena, and he had drawn the attention of the true predators, the ones who commanded the world. The first alien charged, faster than Cain expected. Its spear cut the air, sharp and controlled. Cain blocked with his bone shield, the impact rattling through his arm. He thrust forward, his own spear slamming into the alien's chest. The creature staggered, eyes wide with shock before it collapsed. The others roared, their voices sharp and inhuman, and attacked at once. Cain ducked, rolled, and struck. Spears clashed, claws scraped against armor. Blades flashed in the mist. His body bled from fresh cuts, but his movements were relentless, brutal. He fought not as prey or soldier now, but as a predator among predators. One alien fell with its throat cut. Another crumpled under a broken jaw. Cain caught a third by the arm and drove his blade through its heart. The circle thinned, their confidence shaken. These hunters had expected easy prey, not a human who fought with the fury of their own beasts. When the last of them fled into the mist, Cain stood over the dead, chest heaving, body drenched in blood. His eyes burned with fire. These were not mindless monsters. They were a people, intelligent and cunning. And yet they had chosen to hunt him. He dragged the bodies together and examined their weapons. They were made of bone and stone fused with strange metal. He took one spear, testing its balance, and strapped it across his back. His arsenal grew, his strength sharpened as the night fell. Cain built a fire on the cliffside, letting the smoke rise into the mist. He wanted them to see. He wanted them to know he was still alive, from far away. Faint shapes moved in the darkness, hundreds of glowing eyes, not beasts, but warriors watching him. Cain stood tall by the fire, armor of bone glinting in the flames, weapons at his side. The message was clear. He was no longer prey. No longer a stranded soldier on this world of hunters. The human had become something greater, an apex among apex. But in the distance, the ground rumbled again. The sound was deeper this time, heavier, as if the planet itself carried the footsteps of something far older, far more powerful, waiting to step into the game. Cain tightened his grip on his weapon, his eyes never leaving the horizon. The true hunt had only begun. Cain did not sleep that night. The fire he had built burned bright against the mist, and the shadows of his enemies stretched long and twisted around him. He knew the alien hunters were watching, hidden in the dark, but none dared to strike. They had learned. They had seen what happened to those who underestimated him. When the first light of dawn cut through the clouds, Cain rose and moved on. His body was a map of scars, some fresh, some half-healed, but his steps were steady. He carried the weapons of his fallen foes, alien spears and jagged blades, alongside the tools he had crafted from bone. His armor rattled with every stride, a grim chorus of the beasts and hunters he had slain. The land itself began to change. The plains gave way to black cliffs, and beyond them stretched a valley of stone towers carved into impossible shapes. Cain stopped to study them. These were not natural. They were monuments, proof that this planet had belonged to an ancient people long before the beasts. Proof that intelligence had thrived here, maybe still thrived. As he walked deeper into the valley, the air grew heavy. The silence was thicker than before, pressing against his chest. Even the hunters who had followed him did not enter. He realized then that he had crossed into sacred ground. From the shadows of the towers, a sound rose, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the stone. Cain turned, spear ready, and saw them emerge. They were not beasts. They were not the same hunters he had fought before. These were taller, their bodies wrapped in black armor that seemed fused with their skin, their eyes burning bright like coals. They carried no crude spears. Their weapons glowed faintly with alien energy, humming with power. There were 3 of them, but Cain felt at once that they were worth more than 100 beasts. These were leaders, elders, the rulers of the hunt. One of them stepped forward, its voice low and layered with echoes. Cain couldn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. It was not a threat. It was a challenge. Cain gripped his weapon tighter. He had survived the beasts. He had killed the hunters. Now he would face the ones who commanded them all. The first elder struck fast, its glowing blade cutting the air with a sound like fire. Cain blocked with his bone shield, sparks flying as the weapon bit deep into the surface. The strength behind the strike was monstrous, but Cain held. He shoved forward, thrusting his spear at the elder's chest, but the alien twisted aside with fluid grace. The second elder moved in, attacking from the flank. Cain ducked, rolled, and countered, his blade cutting a shallow line across its side. Black blood spilled, hissing on the ground like acid. The creature shrieked, staggering back, and for the first time Cain saw its shock. They had not expected him to wound them. The third elder came then, its weapon raised high. Cain leapt back, the blade crashing into the stone where he had stood, shattering it into dust. He countered with a spear throw, the weapon spinning through the air, and striking the elder's shoulder. It roared in pain, but still stood, ripping the spear out as if it were nothing. The fight raged for what felt like hours. Cain bled from a dozen cuts, his strength draining, but his mind burned bright. Every strike, every dodge, every desperate counter taught him more. He studied them the way he had studied the beasts. He learned their rhythm, their weaknesses. They fought with power and precision, but not with hunger. They fought with honor. When the first elder fell, Cain drove his blade through its chest and twisted. The second fell after he shattered its leg and slit its throat. The third fought hardest, its glowing weapon nearly ending him. But Cain grabbed a broken shard of stone and rammed it deep into the alien skull. Silence fell over the valley. Cain staggered, dripping with blood, surrounded by the corpses of the elders. His chest heaved, his vision swam, but he did not collapse. He stood tall, and then the hum returned. Louder now. The towers themselves began to glow with light, ancient runes blazing across the stone. Cain turned, his body tense as the ground trembled beneath his feet. From the heart of the valley, a massive figure emerged, its form cloaked in shadows, its eyes burning like suns. It was larger than any elder, larger than any beast. This was no hunter. This was no soldier. This was the master of the hunt. Cain clenched his fists, blood dripping from his hands, and whispered through gritted teeth, "Then come for me." The ground shook as the master of the hunt stepped forward. Its body was wrapped in living armor, black as night, veins glowing faint gold beneath the surface. Its height dwarfed even the giants Cain had slain, and in its hand it carried a weapon unlike anything he had seen before, half spear, half blade, humming with ancient energy. Its eyes locked on him, burning with both rage and curiosity. Cain's breath came heavy, his body weak from blood loss, but he did not step back. Around the valley, hundreds of glowing eyes gathered, beasts, hunters, and warriors forming a silent circle. They had all come to witness this moment. The human who had survived everything now stood before their master. The alien raised its weapon in salute, a gesture Cain understood even without words. This was not a slaughter. This was judgment. One final trial, the master struck first. The ground split where its blade slammed down, sending shards of stone flying. Cain rolled aside, his armor cracking from the impact, but he kept his footing. He countered with a spear thrust, aiming for the creature's chest. The weapon struck but glanced off the living armor, sparks flashing. Cain gritted his teeth. The master's speed was unnatural for its size. Every swing carried the weight of thunder, every strike close to ending him. Cain ducked, dodged, blocked with shields that shattered in his hands. Pain roared through his body as a blade cut deep into his leg, but he pushed on, driven by something greater than survival. The beasts had tried to kill him. The hunters had tried to break him. The elders had tried to prove him unworthy. But none of them had finished the job. He was still here. He was still fighting. And that meant something none of them could deny. He circled, searching for weakness. The master's chest glowed brighter with every swing, a faint pulse beneath the armor. Cain realized it was not just a body, it was a core, a living heart of energy. That was the target. The master lunged again, blade cleaving through stone. Cain dropped his spear, diving low, and drove a jagged shard of alien bone into the glowing mark. The creature roared, a sound that shook the cliffs and slammed Cain away with crushing force. His body skidded across the ground, armor splintering. He coughed blood, vision swimming, bones screaming in agony. But when he looked up, he saw it. The armor had cracked. The glow was brighter now, exposed, vulnerable. The master charged, faster than before, weapon raised high. Cain forced himself to his feet, every muscle burning. He grabbed the last weapon he had left, a blade carved from the skull of a giant, and roared with all the strength left in him. He met the master head-on, The blade clashed with the alien weapon, sparks and light exploding in the night. Cain twisted, driving his jagged bone blade into the crack, deeper, harder, until it sank into the glowing core. The master howled, its weapon falling, its body shaking with violent tremors. The ground cracked beneath them as the creature staggered. Cain ripped the blade free and plunged it again, roaring with every ounce of his strength. The master's eyes flared, then dimmed. With one final thunderous cry, the massive alien collapsed to the ground. Shaking the valley. Silence followed. Cain stood over the body, his chest heaving, his hands dripping with blood. He could barely stand, but he raised his weapon high into the air. His roar echoed across the valley, raw and defiant. The circle of hunters and beasts did not move. They stared at him, silent, their glowing eyes fixed on the human who had defeated their master. Slowly, one by one, they lowered their heads. Beasts bowed. Hunters knelt. Even the elders who had survived bent low. Cain looked around, stunned. He realized the truth. This had never been about survival. This had been about ascension. Every trial, every fight, had been watched. The planet had not been his prison, it had been his throne waiting to be claimed. For the first time since crashing here, Cain allowed himself a small, tired smile. He was no longer prey. No longer just a soldier. He was the apex predator of this world. The mist rolled back, the towers glowing brighter, as if the planet itself accepted him. Cain stood tall, scarred and bloodied, but unbroken. His voice carried into the silence, calm and certain. This world is mine now. The hunters answered with a cry that shook the heavens, not of defiance, but of loyalty. The human had claimed the alien world, and in the language of predator and prey, there was nothing left to question.